welcome to the first of what will hopefully be a series of talks based around my book Second Class Citizens and issues of disability, chronic illness, social security, welfare and poverty. Let me tell you a bit about myself first. I became a social scientist sort of by accident, or at least unintentionally. I had been studying for a PhD in biology, but I became ill during my first year and had to take a break. As I didn't have any PhD money coming in whilst I was on a break, I looked at the benefit system to see what unemployment support I could get. I couldn't get any because I was registered as a full-time student, but I wasn't getting any PhD money because I was on break, and I couldn't work because I was ill. This was around the time that the coalition Conservative Liberal Democrat government was bringing in its Welfare Reform Act of 2012. As I was looking into social security for myself, I quickly learned that the system was not only already punitive and inadequate, but that the government had many policy intentions that would make it far worse. Not only that, but the government wasn't listening to the people and organisations who had experience of social security and the wider welfare state. In particular, they weren't listening to what people with chronic illness and disability, a group I had just joined, were saying. Unable to return to my PhD because of ill health, I turned instead to looking at the benefit system. I love research. This gave me something to do whilst I adjusted to living with a substantially impaired capacity for activity. All the research and learning that I did was only possible because my parents took me in, looked after me and provided for me. It wasn't until some years later, when I was substantially more ill, that I became eligible for enough social security to be able to live independently, though the government would rather class dependence on family as independence and pejoralise the independence provided by state support as dependence. What I learned was surprising and distressing, as many people have discovered in 2020 during the COVID crisis. People who may previously have thought that £73 or even £56 a week was enough to live off discovered that £94 wasn't even close, and that being required to look for work when there aren't enough jobs for everyone is a false, demoralising and immoral situation for any government to put its citizens in. But this is just the tip of a large iceberg created by the post-2010 welfare policies, which have systematically stripped support away from the poorest people in society, while simultaneously castigating these people for not having the time and physical and financial resources to jump straight over entry-level jobs and land in the secure middle-class environment. Having discovered that the government wasn't listening, I also discovered that the government wasn't listening. As just one example, a group of people with chronic illness produced a report looking at the government's proposals to change disability living allowance. DLA is a social security benefit given to people who experience additional cost in their life because of long-term illness or impairment. The 2010 government targeted it as one area in which to make cuts by replacing it with a harsher benefit. When the government consulted on its proposals, it received overwhelming opposition from sick and disabled people and their organisations, but it claimed that people supported it. A lot of the government's welfare plans were likely to cause harm because they were based on certain false perceptions and flawed perspectives. Perceptions and presumptions are really important because what a policymaker thinks is happening will materially change what they think the answer is. A policymaker may misunderstand a situation because they have false presumptions about causes and consequences, or because they look at the same situation but from a flawed perspective. Take a common hypothetical example. A person who is carrying out cash-in-hand jobs is also claiming benefits. From one perspective, this person is a cheat, they're on the fiddle, they're claiming benefits when they actually have work. A policymaker may imagine or assume that this person had work first, and then went and claimed benefits as a nice little top-up or perk. From this perspective, the person should be punished and denied social security for a potentially prolonged period of time. But here's another perspective. A person in receipt of standard unemployment benefits is destitute. They don't get enough to cover their rent or their council tax, so they have to top up those costs out of the £74 a week they're supposed to use for their food, heating, electricity, travel, clothes and other costs. This puts them on less than £70 a week for living costs, a sum which research shows the British public equates with destitution. It means the inability to eat enough food, or to heat your house, or to have weather-appropriate coats and shoes. It means going cold and hungry, even as you have to walk miles in the cold and rain without a waterproof coat or decent shoes because you can't afford the bus fare. This person does some manual labour for cash in hand because they desperately need it. They're not claiming benefits as a perk or out of entitlement, nor are they doing some work out of a deliberate desire to cheat the system. They're destitute and desperate, and the state doesn't give them enough to survive, so they turn to the least degrading option out of cash in hand work, begging and stealing. People in work don't go and claim benefits as a way to top up their income. They don't need to, and they wouldn't be able to fit in all the required job search and job applications and attendance on the same CV and interview skills courses over and over again. Instead, people on benefits don't have enough to live off. If such a person turns to cash in hand rather than stealing as a way to survive, the answer isn't to cut them off from what little benefits they were getting. It's to increase benefits so that they have enough to live off. And then if they cheat the system, you can punish them. But to punish someone for trying to survive is immoral and unacceptable. Here's another example from an event I attended before COVID struck. Imagine you see someone arriving at a food bank to receive food, driving a car. How can someone with a car be poor enough to need charity food? Why don't they sell the car and use the cash, plus the savings on petrol and tax? But in our increasingly poor, underserved and disjointed country, a car may be the only way that a person can get their child to school and from school whilst also getting to and from work. Perhaps they live miles from the child's school because they're in temporary housing far from where they previously lived, but no local school has space to take their child. Perhaps they had to leave an abusive partner and now they're miles away from their place of work. Perhaps they have another child who is sick and has multiple hospital appointments, some even hundreds of miles distant, to see an appropriate specialist. Or perhaps our friend with the car has just lost his job. He's sold everything he doesn't need. He's spending 35 hours a week looking for work, rotating between various libraries depending on which one is open when, because he can't afford to pay for internet. His 2 children are in 2 different primary schools because there wasn't space in his older child's school for the younger child. He's trying to juggle school times with job centre interviews and job search requirements and getting some food in. He's desperately hoping his car doesn't run out of petrol before the end of the week. He's out of money. He can't go to a petrol bank, but he can go to a food bank to make sure that his children have something to eat. Or perhaps you've heard stories about people begging on the streets when they have properties to go back to. The implication is that no one with a house should be begging on the street as if they are homeless. But perhaps they are homeless. Perhaps the house they go back to is a friend's house, not their own. Or it's a temporary hostel that kicks everyone out during the day and charges them for any additional services like cleaning, laundry and food preparation, which leaves them with very little out of any benefits they receive. Or perhaps the property is cold, damp, mouldy, unsafe, unfurnished and generally unfit for habitation, and it's 5 weeks minimum until any benefits will be paid. From one perspective, these people are all cheating the rest of society. But from the other side, the side that matters because it is the side of lived reality, these are people trying to survive in a society that doesn't provide either the opportunity to work or a livable alternative income source. They're begging or borrowing or working cash in hand or selling everything but the bare minimum they need for their life, and instead of being helped by their government, they're being demonised and punished. These were all wrong perspectives. There are also wrong presumptions. There are presumptions about the reasons why people are poor that stem from looking at associations of poverty with other issues such as family breakdown, criminal activity, mental illness, and low education, and then assuming that the predominant direction of causality is from all these things to poverty, not from poverty to these issues. The direction of causality is crucial because the appropriate policy depends on it. If family breakdown is a major cause rather than consequence of poverty, then government should seek to educate families on good relationships, and then as an additional bonus we will also see a reduction in poverty. If low education and poor maths and therefore budgeting skills cause poverty, then people should be educated on how to manage money rather than just given more money. If criminal activity is the cause of, not a response to, poverty, then it is the responsibility of the individual to simply stop being a criminal. If drug abuse caused poverty rather than being a not uncommon response to poverty, then people should just stop taking drugs. If people are poor because of bad choices, then we shouldn't help them by giving them income security. Instead, we should reduce benefits further to create even greater incentives for them to change themselves. If all these things are true, then cutting social security and the support of government for its poorest citizens is not immoral, but instead the most moral thing we can do. When people believe these things to be true, then they can care about poverty and poor people, yet still advocate policies that are harsh and highly conditional on the recipient's good behaviour. But if these things are not true, then such policies are deeply immoral and harmful. So it matters greatly whether these assumptions and perspectives are true or not. The morality of our government and its policies hangs on the truth of its opinions on society, the economy, and the attitudes, behaviours, and choices of poor, sick, disabled, and unemployed people. I wrote Second Class Citizens in order to present the reality on these issues, in particular in relation to sick and disabled people. In this book, I consider what UK governments have done to help their citizens, why, and to what effect. Ultimately, I ask and answer this question: has the UK government breached its sick and disabled rights? In doing so, I address some common myths about welfare, dependency, poverty, and talk about what the government should be doing if it truly wants to help its poorest citizens. Come back for future talks to hear more about what I say in my book and to learn more about the causes and consequences of poverty in the UK.